Hold on to your butt.
Da-da-da. Oh, hello. Welcome to episode 122 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. As always, I'm joined by Mary, a woman who is trying her best to keep her graduate GPA high above sea level. I am merely a sunken trash barge named Darren. Land ho, Mary, land ho. How we doing?
Sunken trash barge.
Well, got to bring it sometimes. You got to bring it
I
sometimes.
guess barges factor into our story tonight.
A little bit. Yeah, definitely is. We got some stuff to talk about. But before we get started, I never forget. I'm going to be a gracious host, and as always, I'm going to ask you, Mary, that very important question, which is, of course, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking Haze Glare by New Belgium. It's an IPA, and I'm drinking it out of just a generic Civil War mug that I got at Gettysburg. So that's nothing exciting tonight, but the beer's pretty good. The mug's pretty cool.
Okay.
So, how about you? What are you drinking?
Oh, God. Thank you so much for asking. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm polite.
You are not annoying at all. You're not an annoying lady. I am drinking Plymouth Rocks IPA. It's a local IPA here from, guess what, Plymouth. And I'm drinking out of my Boston College National Champions hockey mug because it's a big hockey weekend around these parts, Mary, my college world. So we got some stuff to keep an eye on.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case, we got more important things to talk about here, Mary. We do. And, for the first time in a while, we're going to be going seaward in this episode. And we're going to be talking about one of the most enigmatic and incredible stories of the entire Civil War, the plight of the Southern submarine, the H.L. Hunley.
Yes, and I like that you said H.L. Hunley because I think we both heard it called the C.S.S. Hunley before, but that's one of the myths about it. It's actually called the H.L. Hunley, which is after one of its inventors.
It is. And what's great about this, we talk all the time about talking about people and stories. I've spent a few days of my life sitting at the bar in Charleston, South Carolina, Mary, and people love to talk about the Hunley. It's one of their favorite things to talk about, and there's a lot of misconceptions about it. And there's quite a bit now. We got to take it back a little bit about how we're going to go, right?
Mm-hmm.
History is going to show that on February 17th of 1864, that this H.L. Hunley will become the first successful combat submarine in world history after it sank the USS Housatonic near Charleston, South Carolina, before vanishing. And it would stay vanished until 1995. Now,
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk about the mission and talk about all the stuff that went down with it, but and its disappearance, its eventual discovery, and all that. But before that, we got to talk about why the Hunley was built and why anyone would attempt such a brazen act, just an adventure to start with. Now, if you remember, Mary, you've probably forgotten, but when the Civil War began, Washington realized that despite its eventual military superiority, the key to putting down the rebellion was really by limiting the Southern economy.
Mm-hmm.
And at the war's outset, the South's lifeblood was the export of cotton, really overseas. We talked about the blockade. We talked about a lot of this stuff.
We had Alexander Rose on almost exactly a year ago to record. I think it was getting close to our 100th episode.
No, just to draw a comparison, in 1860, Mary, the port of New Orleans, which we're going to talk a little bit about, that city alone exported $220 million worth of cotton. That is 8.1 billion with a B in today's money. That's how important cotton was to that economy.
That's crazy.
Abraham Lincoln, you may have heard of him, Mary.
The guy with the hat.
Okay, got a weird-looking beard, and he's got a nice hat. he quickly understood the importance of keeping the Confederacy isolated from foreign markets. So on April 19, 1861, Lincoln is going to sign the Proclamation of Blockade against Southern ports, which basically was an order for Union forces to begin a blockade of all major Confederate ports. Not a very creative name, but that's what he called it. He will put in place a plan by a guy named General-in-Chief Winfield Scott, who was going to close off all Confederate ports, preventing ships really exporting goods, primarily cotton, and as well as stopping ships from entering Southern ports to deliver cargo. He called it the Anaconda Plan, Mary, and it covered over 3,500 miles of coastline in 12 southern ports, okay? Now, we talked before in previous episodes, these blockade runners from places like England, they were successful running the blockade. Yep. The impact was strong as the war went on. It got stronger and stronger. They began to starve the South of supplies while crippling their economy by cutting down the cotton trade by over 95% by war's end. So it was a slow,
Yeah.
like a more like a python there than I
Yeah.
caught it, but it slowly strangled them out. Finding a way to break this naval stranglehold was by far the most important thing in the South to their economy. And they became more and more desperate as the war went on to find a way to break this, right? Now, if you remember at the beginning, Mary, the Union, when the war began, had just 42 ships.
Yeah.
That's all they had. But it grew to 671 by the time the war went on. And they invented things like the ironclads.
Yeah.
And by the time the war finished, the United States had one of the strongest navies in the entire world.
Yeah.
That's what the war did,
Yeah.
right? And to try to help combat this, the South is going to try to build their own navy, but they're going to rely on privateers. And this is really to help run the blockades, and that's really what they wanted to do, but also find a way to fight and combat the Union Navy whenever they possibly could, right? The Confederate government, as well as wealthy Southerners, were offering privateers upwards of $50,000, over $1.8 million in today's money.
It was quite a lucrative business. And I think some of them even started to be like, well, actually, we want this much. In a way, they're kind of like pirates who are paid by the government.
Well,
that's
what a privateer is, Mary. But in any case, but you're right. Oh my God, right? But in any case, it's a lot. You're right, though. It's a lot of money. That's a lot of DQ blizzards we're talking here. Okay, quite a bit. Now, I'm sure pure patriotism, helped some people on the cause a lot as well. But building a vessel and raising a crew to sink a warship was mucho dinero. And if you could do it, you would certainly try. Okay. Enter a man named Horace Lawson Hunley. Now, Hunley was born December 29th of 1823 in Sumner, Tennessee, before he moves to New Orleans, right?
Where he becomes a lawyer.
He does. He studies. He joins the bar 1849. He's going to practice in New Orleans. Eventually, he became a member of the Louisiana State Legislature. Seems like we talk about lawyers all the time with this.
I know. I was just going to say, like, John Brown Gordon was a lawyer. Hunley's a lawyer. Like,
he was.
I think Francis Barlow was a lawyer.
But here's the thing about Hunley. Not only is he a lawyer, he was a dreamer since he was little, okay? He wanted to be considered in history a great man, somebody nobody would ever forget. That's what he wanted. He carried a notebook wherever he went. And when a great idea popped in his head, he'd pull out the book, he'd write it down in his ledger. That's what he did. So in the fall of 1861, two other men from New Orleans, a guy named James McClintock and Baxter Wilson, they were coming up with an idea on how to make some money.
And they're both kind of tech I guess you could call them tech savvy for their time as well. Like Baxter Watson was a steam gauge manufacturer. So these guys are kind of bringing together their brains and their talents to come up with something that they could invent that would also help the Confederate war effort.
Right. And they came up with this idea for a secret underwater boat that could sink Union ships and make a ton of money. And so Hunley heard of this, and he decides to reach out to them. Now, here's the thing, Mary. Let me ask you a question. If you're going to do such a thing, a covert act, right? You needed money, and you needed secrecy. Okay. If you wanted both, who would you reach out to? Who would you seek?
I don't know.
You'd seek out your Freemason friends.
Yes, that's right.
And that's what they did.
Wow,
Hunley was the secretary of the Mount Moriah Lodge number 59, while McClintock and Watson were both Masons from the Mobile Lodge number 40 in Alabama.
There's another Mason that's going to factor into our
story. There's a lot of Masons that are going to factor into this story. Okay, since all were private citizens, basically they were basically Masons coming together to bring as many they could in to create the secret plot as time was going on against this wartime enemy, this blockade. As it went on, there are some people in the Masonic world who consider the H.L. Hunley expedition to be the Confederate version of the Boston Tea Party. Wow. That's what this thing turned into, right? Hunley, McClintock, and Watson's prototype, they're going to build a boat. It's going to be called the Pioneer. And it was successfully tested in the Mississippi River, as well as Lake Pontchartrain in Louisiana. Now, again, we're not talking about the Love Boat here, Mary. This
No.
is a tough thing. It's a
It's a very
small boat.
basic bit. I would say it's a very basic bitch boat. Like, and the three of them, when they got together, they had started experimenting. Like, they were looking at steam engines, electricity, all this other stuff, like kind of way ahead of their time. But yeah, this like Pioneer was a 3-man boat, and it was considered to be the world's first submarine, really.
Well, they're going to test a 3-man thing, and they're going to get out there and they're going to test it out, and they're going to actually get a little too close to some Union ships,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going to ultimately sink it themselves just before it gets caught. They just thought that this thing is not ready. So while this is all going on, don't forget too, the Union is converging on New Orleans,
Mm-hmm.
right? And all these privateers, they're going to scoot down to Mobile, Alabama to get away from this oncoming Union troops, right? In their hands, they have blueprints for a second boat that they don't want to get caught. And they're going to build a second submarine at a place called a Park and Lyons Machine Shop back in Mobile, Alabama. Now, you mentioned before the technology. These guys are getting better and better. This new second boat, okay, it's going to be bigger. They're going to need a bigger boat. See what I did there,
Jaws
right?
reference.
And this is where they're going to add some more of their friends now, some of their brothers, Thomas Park and Thomas Lyons, to the crew. They're going to build a boat called the American Diver, which is 36 feet long and big enough to hold machinery and a larger crew. Okay. Now, these engineers at Park and Lyons Machine Shop, they tried to use an electric magnetic engine, to propel the vessel to get it going, but of course, they couldn't get it to work.
This is when they were trying steam and all this other stuff, and they just couldn't get it to work for them.
So they fall back on the old, the old standby. The hand crank is what they put in this thing. And by mid-January of 1863, they were ready to test out this new little boat of theirs, and to try to attack a blockade ship. They're going to give it a shot. Now, of course, it's not going to work. The American Diver is going to sink quickly on its maiden voyage. And although no lives were lost at this one, the second attempt at a submarine failed, and no one really knows where it is. As a matter of fact, it still sits on the bottom of the ocean off the Alabama coastline.
Interesting. They never found it. I'm surprised they haven't tried to go after it after they found the Hunley. That would be a pretty cool find.
That is true. But you know what they say, Mary? The third time's a charm.
Yes.
I've heard that before, okay?
With the third Hunley, time's a charm. That is really something.
And they're going to bring another Freemason, a guy named William Alexander from the Mobile Lodge, and he's going to join the crew, and they're going to work on this new third boat, which is going to come to be known as the fish boat. That's what it's going to be called. Not a lot of creativity.
No,
not a lot of creativity.
I don't know. The naming department was not full of.
No, I don't think so.
Not at all.
Now, William Alexander, I mentioned, he's a mechanical engineer from England, of all places, and he has some military experience. He was a lieutenant with the 21st Alabama Infantry. So they're finally bringing in troops now with this. He also brought in a fifth crew member, an injured lieutenant, also from the 21st Alabama, who was back in Mobile rehabbing, named George E. Dixon.
Yep.
Now, Dixon was a Royal Arch Mason, as well as a member of that Mobile Lodge. Now, Dixon is a former ship engineer, and he fights the Battle of Shiloh.
Yeah.
And before leaving for battle, his girlfriend, a woman named Queenie Bennett, is her name.
Queenie?
Queenie. All the creativity came from the nicknames, apparently, instead of the boat. But Queenie Bennett gave him a good luck charm, a shiny $20 gold coin. Now, while Dixon is at Shiloh, he's going to be shot in the leg. And the ball is actually going to hit him in the pocket, and it's going to hit that gold coin, which was in his pocket.
Yep.
Now, it's basically saved his leg. The bullet's going to hit it and injure him. He's going to have to rehab.
Yeah.
But it saves the leg, maybe even saves his life. But it puts a dent in the coin. Now, like I said, the wound did require he go back to Mobile and rehab. But the coin did prove to be a lucky charm. And Dixon kept that bent coin with him everywhere he went afterwards. On the coin, he had inscribed on it, "My life preserver."
Yeah.
To remind him that this coin literally saved his life. That's how he felt.
It's such a, I don't know, that's so haunting.
It absolutely is. And it's during this rehab that he's going to be recruited and joined by his Masonic brothers in the submarine plot. Now, Hunley is quickly going to find out that this financing of this new boat is a little above his pay grade.
Yes.
And he's going to need partners, maybe even a life coach. We don't know. But he's going to basically need to find some more people. He's going to turn to two people, a guy named Dr. John Fretwell and Edgar Singer, both from Masonic Lodge in Texas.
And interestingly, Edward Singer is the nephew of the guy who invented the Singer sewing machine.
That is true.
So inventions and creativity runs in the family. And these are all, as you said, like they're all Masons, and they're all getting together. Like, you know, they're kind of I think they're like very tech savvy, as I said, for their time, that they're able to do all this stuff that has not been done before.
Well, the thing about Edgar Singer is not only is he good at sewing clothes, Mary, okay, he's also got a dark side. He's a member of a covert ring of Southerners called the Singer Secret Service Corps. Say that 3 times fast. This secret group basically built and deployed torpedoes in Mobile Bay. The very same torpedoes that Navy Captain David Farragut would later famously say, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." These are Singer's torpedoes he's talking about. Hunley himself is going to kick in another $5,000, and Singer is going to match the $5,000 to build this third submarine. And they're also going to get an additional $5,000 from members of Singer's Masonic Lodge, a guy named John Brayman, Robert Dunn, and Gus Whitney. Gus Whitney is a relative of Eli Whitney, the cotton gin inventor, by the way.
Interesting.
So these guys, it's all kind of comes together. This new submarine, which we said before, originally be called the Fish Boat, was much bigger than the previous two vessels. This one was 40 feet long and 4 feet in diameter. Now, the thing about it, it's made from 100% recycled materials, Mary, as the sub was built basically with pieces from an old iron boiler from a steamship. So they recycled back then, right?
And
that's what they did.
There's custom cast iron fittings on it. It's going to be powered by a hand crank. So, and the ballast tanks could be filled with water or pumped with hand pumps for submerging or raising out of the water. So it seems like very basic technology compared to what we have now. But back then it was like kind of a state of the art for it. And it weighs 7.5 tons. As you said, it's very small. It's like, and like inside it's like 4'3" tall. So, and that we're going to get into another myth of the Hunley, and that's that the crew all had to be short, which, as we're going to talk about, they didn't have to be. But it's very tiny. You think some of the submarines today, this is like makes the other submarines today seem like the Titanic compared to like what this little thing was.
This thing basically looks like a cigar, is what it really does. It's run by 7 men and a commander, and for the most part, you mentioned before, it had 2 conning towers, which allowed the crew to open up for air with 2 openings. It was about 21 by 16-inch openings. Yikes, no thanks. If you're claustrophobic, you don't want to get in this thing. Now, for the most part, attached to it, or will be attached to it eventually, will be a 16-foot spar, which is built of wood and covered by copper, which would hold a single torpedo about the size of a beer keg, probably an IPA keg for you, with 135 pounds of black powder. That's what this thing's going to be.
That is way too close for comfort. I mean, 16 feet seems like a long way, but geez, if I'm in that Hunley, I'd be like, this is a little bit too close for comfort.
Yeah.
And the average speed of this boat, of course, is going to depend on how fast you can turn the hand crank, is going to be 4 knots or 4.6 miles an hour. So it goes about as fast as the Red Line does in Boston.
It's a slow thing. So after a few test runs with this new boat, they're going to hold a demonstration on July 1st of 1863 in Mobile Bay, where this fish boat is going to successfully dive under a coal barge, and they're going to actually sink it with the torpedo, and it's going to work. The boat around this time is going to be renamed the H.L. Hunley after Horace Hunley. They're going to rename the boat. Now, despite this being a privateer boat and not part of the Confederate Navy, and that's important we mentioned at the very beginning, this is not a Confederate boat. You'll see C.S. Hunley sometimes, which is wrong. This is a privateer boat. This is private citizens who are doing this. This is not the Navy. Now, while they're testing this out, there is going to be a group of rebel officers who are going to witness this demonstration I mentioned and they were impressed at the Hunley at this invention. Witnessing this Hunley is going to be a guy, Rear Admiral Franklin Buchanan and Brigadier General James E. Slaughter.
Mm-hmm.
These are Rebs officers who are watching this. Now, the Confederate brass is going to become very intrigued with this new weapon and how it could potentially help this never-ending problem of this Union blockade. But they felt Mobile wasn't the place to do it. What they wanted was a bigger stage for this thing to try out. Okay, it's more psychological just as well as military now. Now, this is all taking place. You think of the calendar. What's going on in July of 1863, Mary?
That's the Battle of Gettysburg as well as the fall of Vicksburg.
Right. And so things aren't looking too good in the Confederacy at this moment. So the pressure was on Jeff Davis and the Confederacy was really, really tight at this point. And they were looking for anything positive to turn the tide of the war back in their favor. So two of the crew, Gus Whitney, the relative of Eli Whitney mentioned, and Baxter Watson, they're going to travel to Charleston, South Carolina, and they're going to meet with Lieutenant General Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard.
Yes.
They got the meeting because Beauregard was a fellow Mason as well as a member of the Knights Templar.
That's cool.
And so that's how they got the meeting with him. So they got the meeting, and Rear Admiral Buchanan, the one who watched the demonstration, had been promoting this thing for a little bit of time now, and he's going to wire the potential of this boat to Beauregard. He's going to write, "I am fully satisfied it can be used successfully in blowing up one or more of the enemy's ironclads in your harbor." So Beauregard's now he's intrigued now.
Yeah.
He's going to send a wire to Mobile to the other members, but not Watson and Whitney. He's going to send to the other ones saying, "Get your boat up to Charleston ASAP." and that's what he's going to say, literally. They're going to put the Hunley on 2 rail cars, and they're going to send it up to Charleston with hopes that this might be their godsend to break this Union blockade in Charleston. But Beauregard's a cautious fellow, Mary.
Yes.
You know how he is, okay? Before they launch this attack on a Union ship, Beauregard is going to demand that they have a couple of test trials to make sure, hey, wouldn't it be cool if this thing worked before we did it? And that's what he's going to do. Now, initial testing is going to take place, but it's going to be too slow for the Rebs. They want to go. They want to go. So you know what they do? They seize the Hunley, and they make it Confederate Navy property temporarily. They're going to take it, and they're going to put it under command of a guy named Lieutenant John Payne. Mm-hmm. And August 29th, 1863 now, the Hunley is going to be sitting in a place called Fort Johnson, and it's going to be at the dock. And they're going to be preparing for an attack run when something bad goes down there.
Yeah. They're going to end up getting trapped inside. It sinks because, and one of the theories, it's not known exactly what happened, but one of the survivors, there's going to be 4 men that managed to get out, 5 drowned. But one of the survivors says that Payne, the captain, he accidentally stepped on the diving mechanism, which caused the submarine to dive while the hatches were still open. That is one theory behind what happened, but no one really knows. But Payne, I think he does survive this as well.
Payne actually, no one knows why it sank. There's a lot of different reasons why they think it sank. But the theory you say, Payne was actually standing on top of the boat when it started to sink.
Yeah. And
he jumped off when it started to go under. So people think he stepped on something and made it go, and that the hatch was open and filled with water and sank. But for the most part, they didn't really know. But he survives. He's going to survive. Now the Hunley is going to be sitting on the floor of Charleston Harbor for about 2 full weeks.
Yeah.
And somewhere around this time, Horace Hunley himself is going to arrive in Charleston. He is going to be more pissed than you and me when I take the last beer out of the fridge. And you know what he wants? He wants his boat back.
Yeah.
He says, "I want my boat back. You took it. I want it." He's going to get it. Beauregard says, "You know what? It's a death trap anyway. Take this friggin' thing."
Yeah, Beauregard wrote a letter at one point saying like how this is worse for us than the enemy itself. Like he was like, this thing is a death trap. It's not going to work.
And so he's like, this isn't going to work. You could take your little boat back. So with his boat back in his hands, Hunley is going to send for the rest of his crew back in Mobile. back at that Park and Lyons machine shop to come up to Charleston
Mm-hmm.
and help him fix it. Now, it took until the fall when Horace Hunley was ready to put the Hunley back to sea again, right? October 15th, 1863, Hunley is going to schedule another test of this boat in Charleston Harbor. He's got it fixed. He thinks he knows what's going to happen. So he has a plan.
Yeah.
He planned to dive below a boat called the CSS Indian Chief,
which is going to figure prominently in the final voyage.
It was on the harbor, and it was going to merge from the other side. And Hunley is going to basically personally captain this boat along with 7 sailors. He needs to sail it, but Hunley is going to be, you know what? It's my boat. I'm going to captain this one this time.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it right. The Hunley leaves. It goes underwater. Under that Confederate Indian chief ship. Everyone's waiting for it to come up. Guess what happens?
It doesn't come up. It doesn't come up.
They never see it again. It vanishes. Yep. So it disappears for almost 3 full weeks.
Yep.
And they find it obviously buried in the mud at the bottom of the harbor on November 7th.
And it's like nose down. And they have to use chains and ropes to hoist it to the surface and place it back on the dock. And the bodies were still on the ship. And when they found them, they did record, they wrote down what they saw. Thomas Park was found with his head in the aft conning tower. Hunley was still clutching a candle in the forward conning tower. Mm-hmm. And rescuers reported that the forward ballast tank had been left open, which allowed it to fill with water. So again, it's another just accident basically happened. And it was theorized that this time that Hunley himself might have forgotten to close the valve, or he had lost the wrench because it was found close to it, and he might have just lost the wrench and wasn't able to close it in time. And the keel weights had been partially loosened, which it's theorized that the crew realized they were in danger but did not have time to save themselves. So these guys unfortunately all drowned.
So they went underwater, for lack of a better phrase, forgot to shut the window.
Yep.
And it sank. And the thing that's important is the condition that they were clearly, the men all drowned. They were clearly trying to find, you mentioned before, 2 of the men were in the conning tower, including Hunley. Hunley had a candle in his hand. But it's clear by their positions that they very much knew that things were going bad, that the boat was sinking, and they were trying to escape and ran out of time. Hunley obviously is going to be killed. And this is the second accident now within a 6-week period, which leads at this point to 13 deaths of men on this thing. And it's one of those things it's Hunley it's sad because, like I said before, this is a guy who wanted to be great, kept notes of everything he did. He's going to die clutching a candle, drowning in a boat that he tried to create to help save it. It's just the irony and the sadness of a lot of it's bad. But again, this did not mean the end of the Hunley. The surviving men, either for credit to him or respect for Hunley, or who knows why, probably the money.
Yeah.
They wanted to try again.
Yeah.
If you can't succeed, keep trying again. And they wanted to make sure that if they can make it just a few alterations and make it a little safer, they could try again. So George Dixon and William Alexander, they're going to actively to try to do this again. And they're going to use that Singer torpedo. They're going to attach it to that 16-foot spar we talked about, and they're going to ram it into a blockade ship, and they're going to blow it up. And that's what they're going to do. And it's one of those things. But for whatever reason, Beauregard, he's so reluctant. He is, but he basically, he says, all right, he's kind of
like, okay, fine.
He's like, we'll do it again, but here's what you got to do. You can't go underwater anymore.
Yeah.
So if you're going to use this boat and you're going to blow up the ship, you got to stay on the surface. Okay. You can't go underneath because no more. You've lost 13 guys. This is what we're going to have to do. So Dixon, that's what they're going to do, is now the captain of the Hunley crew, obviously due to Horace Hunley's death, and he's going to agree to this terms, and he's going to begin to put a new crew together.
Yeah.
And to prepare for this new mission, Dixon and his crew are going to work relentlessly from mid-December of 63 until the end of January of
Yeah.
1864, and they're going to run several test runs at this point to
Yeah.
make sure this thing
And they're
works.
actually prevented from doing it sooner because the seas were so rough that January that they couldn't get out. And there's a letter that Dixon wrote where he's basically like bored and saying like, God, are the seas ever going to be okay for us to be able to do this? But as you said, they're running like test runs with it and stuff, and it's finally on February 17th that they have this, like, the sea is calm and they're like, oh, we can finally do this now.
They finally can, and sitting offshore and wearing a huge target on its back was the USS Housatonic. Now, this is one of the Union's best warships, and during this Corvair's test run, the Hunley literally got so close to the Housatonic that they could hear the Union men
Mm-hmm.
singing on the
Yeah.
deck. Rumor has it they got there late on a Friday night. They were singing "Call Me Maybe." That's what I heard. I don't know, but that's what I heard. And Dixon wanted to attack, but to your point, the water was a little choppy,
Yeah.
so they wanted to. It was a little too dangerous, so they started to get a little more frustrated. And he's going to write to his friend around then. This is Dixon now. To catch the Atlantic Ocean smooth during the winter months is considerable of an undertaking, as one that I wish to never undertake again. They're
Yeah.
getting frustrated.
Yeah.
Now, he knew that he'd have to wait to make his chance. And meanwhile, this Housatonic is still sitting offshore, just begging to be attacked.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing about the U.S. Housatonic, it's one of those ships that's blocking Charleston Harbor from supplies, but it's
Yep.
also shelling the city. This boat had a crew of 160 men. It had 11 guns, including a 100-pound Parrott rifle. It was built in Charlestown Navy Yard here in Boston, Mary. I don't know if you
That's
know
cool.
that. It's a Boston boat. And for the most part, it was launched on September 11th of 1862 for Charleston, South Carolina, where it menaced the city from the day it
Yeah.
got
And
there.
it's gigantic. I mean, especially compared to the Hunley, like it's 207 feet long and 38 feet wide. Like it's a gigantic boat. So it would be, literally, figuratively, a huge thing if the Hunley could
Yeah.
bring this ship down.
Yeah. Housatonic is commanded by a guy named Charles Whipple Pickering. That's his name.
Interesting.
And he was part of the prestigious Pickering family from Salem, Massachusetts, of all places. If you know Salem's Pickering Wharf, it's
Mm-hmm.
named after his family. The ancestral home of the Pickering family was built in Salem in 1660 and is thought to be the oldest existing home still standing in America. And despite the family's prestige, the Pickering family somehow escaped the Salem witch hysteria of 1692. They just did. But it's an old blue blood New England family, this Pickering family. But anyway, to your point a few minutes ago, the weather starts to improve.
Yep.
And on the night of February 17th, 1864, Dixon and his crew, they knew this was their chance. They're rubbing their hands together.
Yeah.
They're ready. Okay. It was a 3/4 full moon, not quite a full moon, and the sea was calm. So here we go. So the thing is, for this plan to work, Mary, the Dixon knew that stealth had to be the key.
Yeah.
But they also had to find their way back after they blew this thing up. Because they're going to be out in the ocean. The Housatonic's 5 miles away.
Yeah.
So they had to do it. And to get back, Dixon's crew had a plan. Now, after they blew up the boat, they would open the conning tower. Remember, they're staying on the surface now. They're not coming back up. A crew member would wave a light that was a blue light from the conning tower at the shore at a place called Battery Marshall, which is on Sullivan's Island near Charleston. They were going to get out. They were going to wave the light. Then they were going to light bonfires so it would give them a single fire to come back.
Yeah.
The blue light is what the whole thing was, and that's going to be a mystery for later on. Now, sometime after 8 p.m. on the 17th of February, the H.L. Hunley is going to make its way through Charleston Harbor towards the Housatonic, which is floating offshore, right? Now, you can just imagine, inside Dixon and his crew, they're pumping away in that hand crank, they're going, and they're trying to keep it afloat. And you can imagine how nervous they are. And,
Oh, God.
and Dixon's sitting at the front with his legs crossed and his elbow on the table.
Yeah.
That's how he's sitting, right? And they're cranking. Attached to this Hunley, at the end of that 16-foot spar, is that 135-pound Singer torpedo, and they're going to slowly approach the ship. Now, some of the crew members in the Housatonic, they reported seeing something on the water approaching. and think it was a porpoise of
Yeah.
all
They're
things.
like,
That's what they
oh,
thought.
look, it's a porpoise.
That they ignore it, but as it gets closer, they realize there's something strange afoot at the Circle K.
Yes. Yeah.
This is weird. So the men in Pickering's command realize this thing's a friggin' ship.
Yeah.
So they immediately start firing on this thing. Ping, ping, ping. The balls are firing
Yep.
off of the Hunley, right? Moments later, boom!
Yep.
The Stinger torpedo is going to contact with the ship, and it's going to create a gigantic explosion that is going to leave a hole in the U.S. warship. It sank in less than 5
Yeah,
minutes.
it was
That's how
quick.
fast this thing went down.
But there was
It killed.
only 5 of the crew drowned,
It did.
unfortunately.
The remaining 155 were hanging on for dear
Yeah.
life as it was sinking down. Don't forget, this is February water.
Yeah.
The water's 50 degrees out here.
Oh, no, thank you.
And so that's it. They're another ship called the Canandaigua is going to be nearby. It's going to come over to the sinking Housatonic, and it's going to be able to rescue the remaining 155. Now, for the Hunley, it was mission accomplished, right?
Yep.
But here's where the mystery of the H.L. Hunley really begins. And these are the stories people talk about at the bars in Charleston about why it's such a fascinating story. Both Union troops on the ship, as well as some Confederate troops back at Battery Marshall on Sullivan's Island, they claim that they saw that blue light, that blue signal light that they were going to do afterwards, the one that Dixon promised to light after the explosion so the Hunley could find its way back, right? Robert Fleming, he's a member of the Housatonic crew. He wrote, I saw a blue light on the water ahead of the Canandaigua and on the starboard side of the Housatonic. Okay, he says he saw the blue light.
Yep.
Fleming was the only member of the entire 155 survivors to claim he saw it. He was the only one. Back on Sullivan's Island at Battery Marshall, Lieutenant Colonel Olin Miller Dantzler, he's a member of the 20th South Carolina and former South Carolina state senator, by the way, Mary. He's going to write, the signals agreed upon to be given in case the boat wished a light to be exposed at this post as a guide for its return was observed and answered. So what is he saying? Dantzer's saying, I saw the friggin' light. And so according to Dancer, he saw the blue light on that water on the horizon. Dancer, by the way, is going to be killed 4 months later by a canister ball by Company L of the 1st Connecticut Heavy Artillery. He ain't going to make it. But this is where he is at the time. Now, like Fleming, Dantzler was the only Confederate who reported seeing it. But he claims that they lit the bonfires on the shore, but the records show no fire was ever lit. So who the hell knows what he's thinking, right? A man named Jacob M. Cardozo, the editor of the Southern Patriot Evening News in Charleston, he basically corroborated Dantzer's story. That's what that initially. But then he writes in 1866, the officer in command told Lieutenant Colonel Dantzler when they bid each other goodbye that if he came off safe, he would show 2 blue lights. The lights never appeared.
Yeah.
So regardless of what the story was with these lights, who the hell knows? Yeah. But the H.L. Hunley is not going to see the light of day again for 136 years after this night.
And it's actually, I didn't realize this. I don't know why I didn't know this, because Clive Cussler is one of my favorite authors. He is the man that in 1995 on May 3rd, he is going to find the Hunley after 15 years of searching. And for those who don't know, Clive Cussler writes adventure novels. He wrote Raise the Titanic, Sahara, Atlantis Found, whole series, created the character Dirk Pitt. He's the founder of Numa, which it's escaping me for what that is, but it's basically salvage operations and finding lost shipwrecks. And obviously the man he passed away a few years ago. Man had a ton of money, but his books are excellent. And they've usually got some history in them, but he's the one that finds this, finally finds the Hunley. And when they find it, it's on its starboard side with the bow pointing almost directly toward the Housatonic wreck. And Sullivan's Island, and it's in a position where it looks almost like it's heading home.
Well,
like it was headed that way,
And he finds this in May 3rd, 1995. And you mentioned they've been looking at it for 15 years.
Yep.
But they've been looking for this boat since the day it
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The Union Army, for the most part, the Union Navy, began searching for this strange boat almost immediately. And they came out came out empty. After the war, empty. They could never find it. And he's going to use a magnetometer, and
Mm-hmm.
he's going to find it. And it's a fascinating story because they find the boat. They dive about 30 feet in the
Yep.
water. And the thing where it surprised them was where the boat was found.
Yeah.
They'd been looking in the harbor because they assumed it blew it up and they sank on the way back. It was actually seaward,
Yeah.
away from in between, between the House of Tonic, what was left of it, in France. I mean, it was out there.
Yeah.
But so it was in the ocean, so it drifted. It was 300 meters east of where the explosion was, where it was ultimately found. And considering where it was found, the Hunley clearly drifted out to sea before it sank and got buried. But it's funny though how things never change.
Yeah.
When Custer finds the boat on May 3rd, 1995, the United States government claims it as spoils of war. What the hell?
Yeah.
But what they want, and they do that because they want to make it public property.
Yeah.
They want this boat to be recovered, and they want it to be put on display somewhere.
And
they don't want it
also
to be in a private collection.
Also because it's a grave too. Like they're suspecting at that time turnout. They're right.
Wow,
They're
they
right.
they weren't worried. They weren't worried.
Yeah.
They weren't worried much about that.
Well,
They
that was
wanted
one of the things I read about it, was that, like, if there are bodies on it, then, we don't
Right.
want it to be looted. We don't, like, do we make it into a grave and keep it down there? But no, as you said, they decide they want to display it. And yeah, one of the things was who owns it, and the U.S.'s government is like, we do, it's ours.
So recovering it became a very important thing, and it became really a difficult task, as it required assistance from the U.S. government.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy who answered the call was from a South Carolina state senator named Glenn McConnell.
Mm-hmm.
He's the guy who finally decided to do it. McConnell, by happenstance, is a member of the Sons of the Confederate Veterans, Mary, and has always been an advocate of flying the Confederate flag in South Carolina. But was ironic because he was the one with Governor Nikki Haley who had it taken down, the Confederate flag in the state capitol in 2015. So he kind of went the other way on that. But McConnell helped negotiate the contract, helped raise the Hunley, and an agreement was signed but with a local businessman named Warren Lash.
Mm-hmm.
And the work was basically, they work with the Department of the Navy as well as the National Park Service.
It's international because they had, like, the Department of Natural Resources and Oceaneering International involved as well in it.
Okay. Yeah. But they're going to all come together for this plan to raise the Hunley. And because it's been underwater for over 135 years, obviously it was fragile. So breaking this thing up was a very big possibility. Divers are going to dig it out, and then a large truss is going to be lowered, and they're going to basically, like a big magnet, they're going to stick it on top of the Hunley that's 30 feet deep, and they're going to kind of slowly bring it up, right? Now, this is taking place on August 8th, 2000. We're not talking 200 years ago here.
No.
August 8th, 2000, this thing happens. It's national news. All the locals are going to flood to the docks to watch the Hunley come out of the ocean while the work is being done in the distance. And after a few pucker effect moments from the crew that's out there, the Hunley is going to finally emerge from the water and is to be placed on a transport barge and brought to the Warren Lash Conservation Center and placed in a tank containing 75,000 gallons of fresh water to preserve it. So they get the boat in there. The next task is to open the Hunley and find out what's inside. And what they found actually shocked them to a point where it created a mystery that is still being talked about today.
Yep. They're going to find the remains of the 8 crew members all at their stations.
They're going to be sitting, unlike the previous one where they were running for their lives, trying to help open the conning towers, these people were frozen in time. They were skeletons, but they were literally had their hands, the 7 men, their hands on the hand cranks. Dixon still had his leg crossed and his arm up on the table. And they could not believe it was like someone just made them skeletons, but took a snapshot exactly where they were.
They're basically frozen in time, other than, as you said, being skeletons. And so obviously they have to take these guys out because they do bury them in April 17th, 2004. They are all buried. But before that time, they do research because not a lot is known about some of these guys who were on the crew of the Hunley.
But you know what's cool about this though is when they started getting the bodies out, they had to take it with silt, they had to clean them out. You know what they found in front of Dixon's body? They found that dented gold
His
coin.
coin.
They found his coin, my life preserver, that was still visible
Yeah.
on it. And they also found his Freemason Royal Arch pocket watch.
Wow.
If you go to the Lash Center and you can still visit this boat, you'll see those artifacts. But they were right in front of him. His lucky charm was he still had right in front of him.
Yeah, and they do have like facial reconstructions of the guys too, which is really cool. Like you can view them online, and I think you can see them at the museum as well. And it's really eerie because they look so real. And there's
the seven crew. The seven crew, they never get their names told. I mean, Arnold Becker, Johann Carlson,
Yep.
Frank Collins, C. Lumpkin. They never knew his first name. They just called him C. Lumpkin. That's a true story. Augustus Miller, James Wicks, and Joseph Ridgway. These are the men that they found. Ridgway was the only man they could do DNA testing on to find out who he actually was. But they were able to find out who the other men were by where they sat in the sub.
Yeah, and just by doing, they were able to do like the technology we have today, the forensic, like they had a forensic guy from the Smithsonian looking at them. So for instance, so Joseph Ridgway, just a little bit about each of these guys, because, this is at the end of the day, there's humans that were on this part of this story. Joseph Ridgway, he's second in command, and he's born 1833 in Talbot County, Maryland, and his father was a sea captain. He joins the Confederate States Navy in Richmond, Virginia on August 29th, 1862. And he's assigned to the CSS Indian Chief, which is the boat that, as we all know, the Hunley goes under when it sinks and kills the creator, right? He was operating one of the cranks. His other job was to secure the aft hatch. He operated the aft pump and the flywheel. He's just over 30 years old when he dies on the Hunley. And one of the things that was found in him was the ID tag of a Union soldier named Ezra Chamberlain. And Ezra Chamberlain died at the Battle of Morris Island in 1863. It's not known why Ridgway had this on him, but that's something that they found. That is another kind of the mysteries. Like, it seems like as many questions as they're answering, more questions come up from this. And his descendants are in Charleston for the burial. The other one, James A. Wicks. He was born in North Carolina around 1819. He's 5'10", which this kind of there's another guy, I'll get to him in a minute. He's 6 feet, but James A. Wicks is 5'10". He's a heavy tobacco user. This is what they've learned, all from the forensic analysis they're able to do on these guys. He joined the Navy, the U.S. Navy, in 1850. So he originally fights for the North, and then he goes and he's on a ship and it gets sank, and he basically is like, I want to go home. So he crosses the lines in Virginia, and he ends up enlisting in the Confederate Navy, and he is also going to be part of the crew on the CSS Indian Chief. He participates right before he's killed on the Hunley. He participates in a raid outside New Bern, North Carolina, which was for the destruction of a Union ship. And he arrives back in Charleston just days before the Hunley's final voyage. He's in the 6th crank position. And so in case of an emergency, he was to release the aft keel block. And his descendants were also at the burial as well. Miller. I don't think is Miller's first name known?
Yeah, it was Augustus.
Augustus Miller, okay. He's the most elusive member of the crew. He stands 5'8" tall. He's from Europe, but he had been in America for a relatively short period of time. He's probably one of the older crew members, between 45 years of age. Just from the forensic analysis they did, it was he led quite a harsh life. He'd had evidence of fractures on his ribs, legs, and skull. He was a heavy smoker, and he was suffering from the beginning stages of arthritis. He carried a wooden pipe with him, although couldn't smoke it on the Hunley, but it was found when it was excavated. It was still with him, and he's in the 5th crank position. And then you have J.F. Carlson, again, another European. He's between 20 and 23 years old when he's on the Hunley. He's 5'10". He's a helmsman on the boat Jefferson Davis for a while. And then he was with the German artillery when he's recruited to be on the crew of the Hunley. And he's in the 4th crank handle position. And then Frank Collins, he's 6 feet tall. So this is really what breaks the myth of that the crew all had to be short in stature. That this guy is like, he's having to go into this like little boat that's like only 4 feet tall, and he's 6 feet tall. He mans the 3rd crank. And he had tailor notches in his teeth, meaning that he used his teeth for some activity involving like needles. So he could have worked with shoes or clothes or something like that. It's not really known. It is known he's from Virginia and was raised in Fredericksburg. And he sat in one of the most dangerous positions on the boat, apparently. Lumpkin, or C. Lumpkin, where they definitely know his last name. He's probably the oldest crew member. He stands around 5'7", probably about 45 years old, most likely born in Europe. His main duty was just cranking the handle to help power the boat along. And he also had worn notches in his teeth, which was evidence of him smoking a pipe, and he always carried it with him. Obviously, like the other guy, you can't smoke it when you're on board the Hunley, but he had it with him. And found next to him were also a sewing kit and a pocket knife, which are believed to be his. He's also had been a crew member on the CSS Indian Chief. And then Arnold Becker, as you mentioned, not much is known about this guy, but he joined the Confederate States Navy. He worked on a boat called the General Polk, which the crew had to set it on fire because it was going to be captured, and they didn't want it to be captured. He stood around 5'5" and was around 20 years old. He's third in command, and he's seated directly behind Dixon, and he operated the bellows and the snorkel tubes, which was like the Hunley's air circulation system that allowed the crew to breathe. And he also managed the forward pump, and he had to check the valve positions and empty the forward ballast tank if it was needed. So these guys all had different jobs that they did. And we've already talked a lot about Dixon, who was the captain. He's found with that gold coin. But the other thing they discovered, that there was enough of him left, which sounds really bad, to see that he definitely had been wounded on his thigh. And that, as you said, that's his wound from the Battle of Shiloh. So, you know, as tragic as it is what happened with when it was found, we're able to do all this forensic work on them and kind of get a story behind these guys. We're able to reconstruct what they look like because, you know, there is a picture of Hunley, but I don't know if there's pictures of these other guys around, but they're able to do the facial reconstructions. As I said, you can see them on their website. So these guys all have a story, and they're all buried in Charleston, where they were buried in 2004.
Yeah, there's no known photographs of the other 7. 4 Europeans. A lot of them came from backgrounds unknown. Who the hell knows where they came from? But the thing about it, and the thing that's kind of haunted the people who started the Hunley for a while, is what killed them. Because you said before, they opened the boat up and they're still sitting there as if they're just all asleep and they never moved. It was always assumed that the explosion blew a hole in the submarine, and which led to it sinking and killing all 8 men who drowned in the harbor. That was always, they never found it. And a lot's changed. There's a book that came out called In the Waves, which is published in 2020 by a PhD scientist from Michigan and Duke University named Rachel Lance. And she wrote a very compelling case that the victims of the H.L. Hunley didn't drown, but died of something called blast trauma. And so she lays out the case, and it says that when that 135-pound torpedo exploded, the blast waves basically killed the men almost instantly where they sat, and the current floated the Hunley seaward, where it was eventually found. But you know, this, considering there was no evidence of any trauma, of any crew member trying to open the conning tower, trying to escape, it seems to make as much sense possible. And although it appears that to make the most sense, that no one really knows that death is still a mystery, but that's the most common thing. But here's the thing though, if they died instantly, that removes that suspicion about those blue lights they talked about, right? And that's the whole thing. But who knows? The death of the crew of the H.L. Hunley will always be one of those stories in history that will always be debated regardless. And I'm telling you, you sit at those bars in Charleston, this is the stuff they talk about. It's not who broke first or the 11th Mary. It's what killed Dixon and what killed Ridgway. And they talk about it, and people get really passionate. Now, what's interesting was, you mentioned the funeral, and the last orders that was given to the Hunley and to those around them who played a part in before it was launched. These orders are read by PGT Beauregard before the mission started. And his quote was, "Pay proper tribute to the gallantry and patriotism of its crew and officers." And 140 years later, on April 17, 2004, this order from Beauregard was carried out when those 8 crew members of the H.L. Hunley were buried at Magnolia Cemetery in Charleston, South Carolina, in full military honors. They were buried next to the other 13 men
Mm-hmm.
who died in the expedition, lost their lives in previous Hunley missions, including H.L. Hunley himself. The funeral procession that day in Charleston, there was 50 Freemasons in the procession
That's
from
so cool.
Alabama and South Carolina, as well as hundreds of other Masons lined up the streets for this funeral. Brother George E. Dixon was giving a full Masonic funeral, which was performed by the master of the Mobile Lodge number 40, a guy named Wayne E. Simon, using the funeral rite published by the Baltimore Masonic Convention of 1843. If you know what that is, you
Very
know what
cool.
that is, okay? You can still visit the H.L. Hunley today, as well as some of those recovered artifacts we talked about, such as Dixon's bent gold coin, that Royal Arch watch fob, the whole deal, at the Warren Lash Convention Center in North Charleston. They do tours on weekends. Definitely go and check it
Mm-hmm.
out. But here's the thing for me, okay? The coolest thing about this, if you go to visit Charleston, you go
Yep.
visit them, okay? One of the coolest things you'll ever that attached to this story, in my opinion, is if you go down to Battery Marshall on Sullivan's Island every year on February 17th at around 8:30 p.m., and you look out in the harbor, you'll see a really cool reenactment. Every single year on that date and at that time, a small boat goes out to the site of the sinking of the USS Housatonic. And you know what they do? They raise that blue light.
That's so
They,
cool.
they raise the blue light that it's visible for all to see on the shore. Whether or not the crew actually was able to give that final signal, it isn't known. But Charleston makes sure every single year on that date that a blue light is seen on the horizon to honor those who lost their lives in the H.L. Hunley. It is one of the coolest things you'll ever see if you go
That's
and
so
see it, I'm
cool.
telling you.
That's very, very cool.
But it's a great story. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those ones that it's one of those ones you go to, especially if you go to a place like Charleston. They'd love to talk about it, but it's fascinating and it's a mystery, and it's great they finally found it, because up until the mid 90s, it fell off the planet.
Yeah, and
And
there's
so and
yeah, and I was gonna say they're still researching these guys too, trying to find whatever they can about them from genealogy records, from census, and as more stuff, as they find more stuff, they can find out more about these guys to tell more of their story. Like some of them, we don't know a lot about them. We don't even know where they were from. We just know that they weren't, a lot of them were Europeans and all that. But it's still interesting, and definitely I haven't read it yet, but I want to read Rachel Lance's book. I read a paper that she wrote. And in that paper, she talks about all the experiments they had to do to come to this conclusion that they had died. Basically, from it's like a percussion, like the medical term for it is lethal pulmonary trauma, which basically does nothing to your skeleton, but it's just like your heart just stops. And it was
just shut you off.
she concluded that they probably died like pretty much instantly when it happened.
And judging by what it looked like, it's pretty clear. Now, if you go visit the Huntley, you go to the Lash Convention Center, you go visit it, and you see how small it is.
Mm-hmm.
Just picture 8 men sitting in there working a hand crank, getting ready to attach a bomb to a 16-foot spar. Think of the stones you would have to
Oh
carry to
yeah.
get inside that boat. But then again, these 8 men, and as well as the other 13, they're known to history. But again, these are people who, for whatever they felt they were fighting for, they put their lives on the line to
Yeah.
do it. And the thing that remember, most of these guys were not even military; they were
No.
private citizens, and
Yeah.
they did it because either for patriotism or for money, whatever it was. They did it, and by the end, they wanted to make sure they could try to make sure they lived the best way that H.L. Hunley would have. They wanted his boat to succeed so bad
Oh
because he
yeah.
put his whole life into it. He didn't live to see the final thing. He would have been on the boat realistically, and he
Probably.
probably obviously would have died. But they wanted to make sure that they did what they could to
Mm-hmm.
honor his memory and his boat.
Yeah.
And if you go there, you can go to Magnolia Cemetery. You have a nice setup. You can see all the graves laid out. And it's a great place to go.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get a chance to go, definitely do it. So I think that's a good place to drop us off
Yep.
right now, Mary. I think we did these guys justice. But what's coming up for us?
Yeah, well, we got to sit down at the old headquarters and talk about some more episode ideas. Again, which hopefully we'll be back in a couple weeks. We will be having our usual YouTube live stream will be this Sunday at 10 o'clock Eastern time. We're going to be bringing our roundtable back hopefully soon, as well as our book club for 2024, which we have some books in mind for that we need to announce soon as well.
Yeah. Announce that soon. Trivia coming up soon. We got a lot of fun to do. So hopefully you can join us on our YouTube live on Sunday, like Mary said, at 10 o'clock. And away we go. All right. So any final words from you, Fincheru, on this Friday night here in cold Plymouth, Massachusetts?
Well, thanks for bringing it like you always do.
Oh, I was happy to do it.
All our listeners for being with us for these 122 episodes. Whether you're watching them on YouTube or listening to them, the audio version, we thank you very, very much for your support, as well as to the people that come out and join us on our YouTube live streams on Saturday or Sundays whenever we do them. That's always a great time too.
All right, guys. Well, we appreciate it. Thanks for listening. We will talk to you all, Mary, as they say, on the other side.
See y'all later.
Go be safe.
Bye.